Okay, so welcome to week 3 or color exploration, and we can start this session. And let's have a look at the content of this week module. And we have 4 topics to investigate on the color exploration. And the first topic that we are going to look into will be about the history of color and the relative trends, and of course, the styles. Then we're going to have a look at the color systems and what are the industry standards. And then we'll explore what are the color trends, especially for 2019, and every year we have a different trends and different color. And lastly, we'll have a look at what are the more common color scheme and style that have been used in the interior design scene. So these are the 4 topics that we'll look briefly throughout the session of this week 3. So first of all, we'll do a very quick revision on color. So we have seen that the current color wheel is composed of 3 primary colors. They when they're added together, they create a secondary hues, and when the secondary hues are added again with the secondary adjacent color, we have what we call the tertiary hue or the tertiary tones and value. Now, this is your color wheel, the color spectrum. Outside of this color spectrum, there is no actually color that we can pick it up or we can choose upon. So in the end, we are really limited color palette that we use it. But what makes the infinite complexity of the color wheels is their dimension through the value of the white and the black tonal value, and their chromas and their adding to the hue. So they give you a very wide spectrums of different tones and shades of hues and tones of the color that you can pick upon. So remember, there is we have these 3 axes. We have the hue, which is your color saturations, and then we have the value, light value, like watercolor, or the black for the mid-tone and darkest color. So always think in these 3 primary concepts to represent the color through the use of light color, saturations, and mid-tone and darker color. So that resuming very simply. Now let's have a look at how color has been expanding through history. So through the ages, color has been used to represent some dimension, some reality. And through the prehistoric times, we always have used color to imprint our past or present or story or narrative. And through the prehistoric time, the access to color actually was just by use of soil or earth or minerals. And you can see that color, they are actually very limited. They are actually earthy colors, so there is a lot of yellowish and brownish and reddish to it. And it wasn't limited as well how you combine or mix this color. So we used to use kind of animal fat or blood to amalgamate the earth or soil to make a sort of base. Then we could use to paint on whatever medium. In this case, the rocks or stone were used. But you can see in the prehistoric time or in the beginning of the time, the color was quite limited. You can see black from the charcoal, from the bonfire, and again we have lots of brownish and earth-soil color. We then move with a bit more complex civilization. For instance, with the Egyptian, we start to have a more sophisticated technique. So the medium change as well. From the rocks and stone, we get into the papyrus, which is what today is our current papers. And we also have the influence from the other civilization, for instance, for the Babylonian, the Assyrians, the Middle East, the Greek and the Romans, and they add extra dimension to the kind of color palette that we have. For instance, the indigo color, which is that blue, the vibrant blue, it comes from the natural use of the organic fibers. And you can see almost the color palette, it expands more exponentially with the ancient civilization of the Egyptian, Romans, the Babylonians and Assyrian, and etc. Now, color in this civilization was very important because it's also a representation of a sacred. So color has a use as a sacred medium. And for that extent, the arts was used as a tool to represent the sacred in the sacred and the spiritual for the human thoughts, ideas, and symbology. So we see the color through the ancient civilization takes a different, more important and more predominant role, and as such it expanded the color palettes of it. We then get into the more Renaissance period, so that's where the technique gets more sophisticated. The medium to amalgamate the dyes and the soils, it get introduced with the medium of oil, and that was introduced by a Finnish painters and refined by the Italians like Leonardo's and Caravaggio. And with the medium of the oil to expand the primary and secondary color, we start to have a very powerful use of color, so we are able to express different tones and values of a specific color, of a specific hue, and we start to get more of a sort of more a photorealistic rendering of an image and of a picture that it almost become very photographic. And as well, again, the study of the light is getting more sophisticated, more complex with the Renaissance because of the different studies of the art and science that it occurs. So the art and science and engineers in the Renaissance, they all bound and merged together. They're not any longer just the artist, just the architect, just the carpenter, and so on. So they blend into it. That's what was very powerful of the Renaissance. So we have this beautiful different tonal value, very photographic painting, almost hyper-realistic. And so we reach a very sophistication use of the color and their tones, on the contrary of the previous historical period. But it comes with the modern art in the late 1860 through the 1970, where actually color start to get a different meaning and different medium and different tools are used differently from the previous century. And that's because the introduction of the camera, the photographic camera. And so we see that with the advance of technology, the meaning of color changed direction. And so with the new modern art, currents and style, like for instance the Impressionists like Van Gogh, Matisse and Monet, color becomes an expression of the impression of the retina, of the light bouncing on the landscape, on the object, on the trees, and therefore color is being used more as a pure hue, like a pure blue, with this very brush stroke of pure yellow and pure red. And when they combine together, they create the vibrancy, which is not any longer what was kind of photorealism that it was trying to achieve in the previous century through the Renaissance on the painting. So through modern art, we see color becomes not any longer an expression of representing reality, but an expression and the tools for the first time of expressing an emotion, of expressing feeling, of an or expressing a perception of the reality through the human sense and through the human psychic. So this, I really encourage you to, if you have the opportunity, go this and see the Impressionist painting from any museum from live. You will real see the complexity of this brush stroke given to this painting. But then again, it start to shift again from the modern art. We get into more contemporary art from the 20s and through the 50s with the Art Deco, where color is become more used into the interior of the space, whereas before it was more relevant to the arts and painting. It's get more into the interior, more into the space. And because there is, with the event of the Bauhaus, this German school of design, where we start to see the infusion of design into everyday object, into furnitures, into homewares, into architectures, into all the daily life object that we have, and expand it as well into craftsmanship. So we see that through the contemporary arts, 1920 and 50, color start to take a more meaningful expansion into the built environment, into the space, into the houses, into the materials as well. And it almost like the material speak with the true color in itself. And so through the 20 and 40, which is also a recession because of the First and Second World War, we have an explosion in the 50s with the use of color. This is because there is what we call is the economic boom of post-war reconstruction. So we have in America this explosion of houses, whereas before not everyone had their own house. They had more than slums, or they were living in a big family in the rural area. But with the post-war reconstruction, we started having family to have their own adobe, their own house. And as such, we see that in the 50s, there is sort of studies in new material, new manufacturing process, and therefore we get this kind of pastel color get into the houses in the 50s, into the kitchen, because it was thought as a very calm, relaxed, and peaceful environment. So for the first time, we see in the 50s more mass market of color psychology that we have seen it before apply in the living environment. Now in the 60s, it's kind of, it gets more an evolution from the 50s, but it became more of a lifestyle. In the 60s, there is this shift into the social, economical, and as well political. We have the rising of the hippies. We have the Beatles coming up. We have the rocks expanding from the scene in the 50s. We have the first disco opening in New York during the 60s. They took all the other dimension. We have during the 60s the man landing on the moon, and therefore the color palette, they kind of become more vibrant. There is more green, there is more orange, there is more use of purple. There is also the integration more of plastic materiality, and so there is this very vibrant joy of life, of revolution happening in the 60s, and it does affect as well the lifestyle. So I really encourage you to do a further reading into the 60s, because it is a really important period of style and design, almost more important in the 50s, because it's expand as well in the shapes and forms of everything. So 60s is quite a very powerful and very prominent movement of for color design and styles. We get then into the 70s. The 70s is almost quite a unique, as it construct more of it, expand more from the 60. But again, we see a more use of graphics, and more of use of textures, more use of wallpaper, a use of materiality like wooden panels. And so there is more richness through the 70s, almost like we get a simplicity during the 60s, more essential line, and we get into this phase of trend into a more sophisticated textures and richness of color. Like in the 70s, it's very famous to use the color purple or a very bright orange and wooden color. So there is kind of this expansion, but also because there's an apex in the use of drugs and psychedelia building during the 70s, which in the 70s it kind of grew exponentially. So we see the 70s almost the exceeding use of color during the 60s. Now, the 80s is a very important period for us, and is almost like one of those turning points through all of the period. We have a very important movement, which is called the Memphis, generated from Italy with Ettore Sottsass and other famous architects. And they really take color into a more different dimension. So we start to see a more geometric shapes, and through these geometric shapes, we really start to see a more harmonic, complementary color palettes and color scheme of complementary color, analog colors, triads of colors, and these kind of pastel colors. And we really see more joyful and playful styles of the color applying to the environment. It's almost like we see a culmination of all the arts and styles, and as well the color palettes that we see in the preceding period. And also the 80s is a period where socially fashion has become really huge. So fashion is mixed with architecture, it mixed with interior design. That's where retail design is booming. That's where the branding's expanding. So we have the first, for instance, concept of a branded store like the Esprit or Levi's, or all of these fashion labels, Diesel, this street style fashion company coming on the forefront, and all of these mixing together. So there is a really melting pot of the different design discipline into the built environment. But Memphis is one of those styles that really create a sharp way that was actually built through the different cultures, Egyptian culture or ancient culture, and there was this remixing and rediscovery of history in a more contemporary and modern way. There is also the Californian New Wave, very important. So we also see very geometric texture coming into place into the environment, more graphic forms and shapes, in contrast color, black and blue and yellow, all coming together in a very new and vibrant way. Now the 90s is almost going backwards to some respect as for color in the interior design, and that's where almost from all of the hyperactivity of the 80s, we went back to a more undertone color palette of suffused color tones and overshadowing to it. So there is a more, to some extent, a more undertone and more of a quality of life, a more relaxing environment. So it's almost like from your big night out, you get a big headache and drinking, and the following day you just need to rest. And that's what kind of happened in a metaphorical speech into the 90s. So the 90s went back into the more tonal undertonal values and tones and shades and more suffused and more livable. And we also get more into more artistic, like we have coming back the stuccos for the walls, more textures to it. But mainly the underlying principle of the color through the 90s is this mono dual color tones, color scheme of your neutral color palettes. More, suffused and sophisticated, less exuberant than the 80s. And then we have through today's, through the more, expansion on the media, such as World Living, D&D magazine, and all of this interior design, trendy style. This is a more refined study of the color, and therefore more sophisticated color tones overlapping between the analogs of the color wheels, and a more kind of in-depth study of what are the color tones of living of the earth, and as well of the ambient, and the walls and the carpets and the floor, and etc. And that's more in line with today. We can see how they actually color in the end is going to these days apply more specifically through all of the objects that surround our living, through the furniture, the textiles, the wool. And we have this really very well thought color scheme happening in a more gentle and more in-depth psychological use of it. So we see that houses of today are more sophisticated as a color palette, as a color scheme. Almost a very good balance to it. So we have seen how color has been through the ages. Again, think about that came through the medium, the technology, and as the medium technology evolved, as well the sophistication of the color and the application of the color, it gets more complex and it gets more sophisticated. As today, we really are in a very sophisticated period to it. Now we jump into a color system. So we'll have a look at what are the main color systems that we use. And predominantly there are two systems to handle or work with color. One is called the RGB, which is red, green, and blue. And this is using just the light, like the monitor of your iPhone or the monitor of your computer or anything to do with your iPad, using the RGB color mode. So it is the red, green, and blue. These are the primary color. And they are basically a light color based on light. And the second one, the second color method is SYK, which cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And this is a method using pigment, such for printing or for anything to do with paper or print on a material or print on a surface. So there are two systems of color or method that we're looking at. One using the light, and is the RGB, and one use the pigment, which is the SMYK. It's a combination of these two. So what's the difference between these two methods? Well, the first one, it's called additive color theories or additive color method. So it means it adds the green light with the red light, and then it creates your secondary color, which is yellow. And so it goes with the blue. So the blue light added with the red light, it creates the magenta. And when we adding all of these color lights together, we get pure white. That's how our color monitor works on our screen devices. Like for instance, you'll see when we are going to use Photoshop or AutoCAD or any of those computer applications, that we are going to use these additive color theories to produce a picture to view on the screen. And also we're going to use what we call the subtractive method when we are needed to print on the paper. And the subtracting method is actually subtract the color of the 4 ink. They, when combined together, they mix together, they create your color palette or color scheme. So the SMYK is pretty much is based on the oil painting. So if you like, for instance, mix the blue with the red, you get your purple color. And so it is in the SMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. K stands for black. It add the dye to the other dye, color dyes, create all of the color combination, color variation. So you will need to deal with these two methods. Plus, you will have kind of a difference between these two systems. So what kind of is the system difference between an RGB and the SMYK? Well, simply, there is no difference. The only difference is the RGB method, it will always look much brighter because their source is based on light, emanating light, whereas the SMYK, the look will be much kind of dull because it will reflect or it will bounce the light off the surface. So what you will see on the RGB will be slightly different from the SMYKs. So SMYK will always be a little bit dull than your RGB color reference. And it will be kind of a 10% shift in tonal value. So you might look at something on the screen and then you print it out, so, but it's not that vibrant as I was expecting or as it was looking on my monitor. So always refer to your printed, to your final print on your design. And how do we do that? How do we calibrate these things? What is our reference system? Well, we use the PMS, which is the Pantone matching system. Now, this is kind of universal method used across the globe, across the world, and I recommend you go and check it out. Pantone.com, there is all the reference color, and that's what the industry professional they're using. And this system gives the designer and decorators the ability to specify and use a specific color, irrespective of where the goods are printed or produced. So it's a kind of system, a numbering system who has a breakdown of coloring that you give to your suppliers, and your suppliers can reproduce precisely as you as instructed. So there is this quality matching assurance in place that you get, both of you get the same color that you specify. That's the use of the Pantone matching system. So it accurately match the colors for anything made of pigment, and they extend to painting, fabrics, paper, and pretty much these three major materials that you use as an interior designer. So they will be for fabric, they will be for fashion, they will be for interior design, and they will be for printing. Now, Katie, if your partner is a graphic designer, he will definitely will show you a PMS match system and will tell you all about because it's widely used with the graphic design. And the PMS is almost like the color Bible, where you make sure everything looks the right color that you specify. So we use that as well for the interior design. So remember, we have pretty much the RGB for your monitor or display device, your SMYK for your printing, and finally we have your PMS, Pantone matching system, to specify the color that you want to use it. Now let's have a look at the trends. Now, trends have the seen through history that comes and goes. So what is good today is not good tomorrow, and what is good tomorrow is not good today. But what is important is to have an understanding of these fashions and trends. So you kind of have up to date with your knowledge, and therefore you can transfer that knowledge, that your current knowledge of the trends, to your clients for any argument or discussion. Um, there are, however, some color schemes that are timeless, that doesn't matter what are the trends, and these timeless color schemes, for instance, are your neutral color palette, or a red color is always a primary color and will always be trending no matter how you use it or when you use it. It's in what context that you use them might differ, but these are kind of timeless color scheme. As such, for instance, black, although not a color, it is used in a very timeless and fashion, and every year people use that black or a percentage of it. But also trend to help you to thinking outside the box, and therefore if you get the trends, you can kind of go above the trends are setting. Now, usually, how do we say what is trending? Well, that is based on what is the mass media telling you through, through current social and political matters, through current fashions, for instance, through what's happening in retails, through shops, what has been actually manufacturing, through designer shows, through designer trade expos, and as well through industry professional that they work actually on trend specific. So there are design studios that just study color for the trends. Like for instance, Pantone, which is this big company that produce color, it always study color, and he also decide what kind of trends color they are going to hit on the shelf. So it's a mixture of not just one source, but through many, many sources. Keep an eye through your internet or social media, although I'm not really kind of keen on that, mainly because social media, they're really on the last hour, and then the next hour is already old. But look more into more printing, magazine, shows, fashions, display, and what's happening on the advertising as well. And as well, architecture. Architecture is big for the interior design. See what kind of materials are being using, and that gives you the trends into the interior design. Now, this is pretty much we just touched base. So what influence trends and who are the trends maker? Again, the industry professional, fashion designer are the one big in setting the trends because of the textile, because of the fabrics, because of the color collections, because they work in advance. Like for instance, these days we are in summer, they're already working on the summer on the next year. So they always work like 12 months in advance for us. But also from lifestyle, from nature, see what's happening in nature, see what's happening through your travel, see what's happening in the different country and culture, see what's happening in your political scenery, and see what's happening through magazine, through industry communications. So that's where the trends are located. And you are actually the one to pick it up, this trend, and to really observe what are the mainstream. There is always a current mainstream through this period, through this session. Now, on the current trends, there is some of the reference. When we look in the PDF we uploaded, we're not going through tonight's session, but you will go through. So Benjamin Moore color is nothing else than a painting color. That is American company, and he will have the trends for 2019. They are more kind of a warm color. You also can look to HUDs, which is this website of a reference for suppliers, and you find everything in there that gives you a good indication of furnitures, uh, supplies, materials, and etc. So there is a trend for 2019. There is an interesting article to explain where do color trends come from, and this is pretty much what we see or investigate in this session. And again, Dulux Color of the Year 2019, which is a bit more of a mellow, spicy honey, soft and warm amber tone. That's what the Dulux painting company, manufacturing company, recommend for 2019. So when we upload the PDF of the lecture, you will have as well the link so you can investigate on your own time and watch the material. Now, Pantone, which is the biggest, we recommend Pantone is a bit more in depth than Dulux. Dulux is only concerned with the painting for the wall, so it's a bit more limited. I will really encourage you to look at Pantone first and then see what Dulux is doing. But Pantone is kind of getting more into the vibrancy and more into the ecological. And as a matter of fact, his new color for 2019 is Living Coral, and is actually to emphasize what's happening with our natural environment that is being slowly destroyed, and we slowly destroy with the carbon emission. And so we almost losing the true source of color that we take from nature. And so there is a kind of accountability. Pantone said, well, this year we're going to create a trend. We actually highlight a social and political issue. It is about bring back nature, bring the awareness of nature and the color that we have into the ambient, into the conversation, into the dialogue. And therefore, this year, Pantone special color is called Living Coral, and more of vibrancy of the color. Now, Dulux is also do some interesting showroom where you can see how the color combination can work it out. And we have this really warming amber, tonal, warm, homey feeling to it. Now, this year much warmer. The previous year in 2018, it was much cooler. And again, you can see that trend are not really set in stone, but are only recommendation and are only suggestion, and they're not there to say, well, this is trend for 2019 and you should follow. They are recommendation, they are suggestion, they are kind of information they show you and provide you on how this color they can be mixed and combined together. So we have, for instance, for the Dulux has announced 4 colors: the Just Walnut, Anger and Blanket, Soft Stones, and Spiced Honey. And even the naming convention that you use, they give you an indication of what tonal value they're using. So they're all with the kind of bit of orange and yellow and red into it as a hue. And you have this earthy, warm feeling. So they say, we create this warm feeling. So Dulux forecast for 2019. Again, the PDF, the lecture PDF, there are the hyperlink, and you can click and go. See if I can grab the screenshot just to give you an idea. Share. Okay, we are back. Let's see if I can share. No. Okay, you can back to the PDF and you will get everything with the link. So what about the design influence? Well, we all need inspiration, so we can't really design with a blank canvas. If we don't see it, it's hard to visualize. That's where we need some inspiration. So what inspiration are? Nothing else than some resources. And usually these resources always come from a past period in history, and they kind of stimulate their design thinking, their design process. So they inspire us to look into the past to create something new or revise for the future. Now, what is important is through past trends. Now, past trends are also what we consider styles. So through knowing of the styles, you will be able to understand the current trends and current influences, because trends are always based through historical references, especially fashions, especially architecture, and as well as interior design. So history is really, really important. Understand history, it means understand your future trends, because you can identify, recognize, and propose in a much more positive and convincing idea to your client. So it's much easier to sell your design or your idea to the potential client. Now let's have a look at the last topics and last argument for tonight's session. And we look at a bit more what are the considered more common color scheme and style. Now, color scheme and style, they kind of hand in hand. So they always are very synonymous. And what we're looking at is a more widespread and use it in our design history. So we have the famous Scandinavian styles and color scheme. Now we are looking at, now Scandinavia has become more very famous lately, because there has been quite a huge branded exportation of Nordic product of the Northern Europe, like Norway and Scandinavia, the famous IKEA, for instance, that's a very good sample, or Marimekko, which is this really famous branded Swedish as well. But these are kind of Nordic countries where they take inspiration by their own environment, their landscape. And so the landscape is always in winter, so there is not much light, and therefore the sun is very pale, and therefore what you see outside the window is this very plain, flat landscape with a few mountains, few trees. There is no richness in the ambient because it's cold, it's winter, nothing grows out in there. Therefore, there is this view of the world as a very simple, and as such, when the landscape is in a wintry mood, your color scheme is very suffused, is the tonal, there is no saturation like in the tropical. Therefore, everything becomes simple, is become elegant, is a reflection of the picture that you see out of the window, and therefore you need a sense of light and warm and comfortable environment. Therefore, you use this color scheme to create that warm feeling into the house due to the condition of the environment that this Nordic country, they have it. And so Scandinavia has become kind of a trendy because somehow it brought some refreshed way to live the interior in a more minimal and humble way due to the condition of living of the country. So that's where you come out with this, say, Scandinavian style, this color palette and color scheme. We then have kind of the opposite. We have the Bohemian. Now, the Bohemian it is very interesting style. It actually comes out from the modern art through the French artists of the Impressionists, They started in the mid-18th century. These artists, wanderer, didn't have a non-traditional lifestyle. So very poor people, very poor artists. They always painted for their own sake, for their own art, not for the commercial success. And therefore, these artists, they were accommodated in in this room where they were living and eating and painting just in one room, in a boarding room. And therefore, their furniture was furniture they didn't buy, but was given by their friends. And therefore, you have these eclectic styles of furniture. They are kind of mismatched because of that kind of lifestyle, a bohemian lifestyle, kind of a gypsy or vagabond. But on the contradiction of the gypsy, the bohemian is more of a free-spirited thinker, more true to his own core value of the arts. And therefore, when we refer to the bohemian style, we refer to a style that is very eclectic. So it's kind of a mix and match of different furnitures, different piece of arts, and as well kind of textures and color and vibrancy of color. That because it refers back to the Impressionists, where color was used in the pure hue, in the pure form. So we can see is the Bohemian style. And Bohemia has been very famous and very successful into the nightclub scene, for instance, in the retail. So you see in the kind of the disco in the 80s were very bohemians. Just to give you that vibe and buzz. And these days, even the kind of the contemporary trendsetter, they have used the bohemian to in a very contemporary fashions. Now, kind of not the yuppies, but more social young group. They mix and match. So bohemian is kind of become back in vogue in the last 5 years. Now, the Art Deco is a very important period movement. You might have studied through different or heard through different reading. It was through the 1920, 1930, but it is important because it has kind of had a very wide influence across all of the manufacturing of furnitures and homewares and using of materials, use of rich color, bold geometry. So it's kind of a precursor of modern contemporary design, the Art Deco. And it also had influence in the architecture, as had influence in the fashion. So for the first time, we have very strong style that embrace all of the exposure of the design into the different disciplines, from architecture to furniture to fashion to textile to painting to arts to craftsmanships and so on. So Art Deco is really big for this very simple reason that embrace pretty much everything. And again, I highlighted the importance of the Bauhaus school that was the kind of breeding ground of the Art Deco movement, educations, and research and study. Now, the mid-century modern design is another very important and famous. Again, it came out after the post-Second War Reconstruction, and that's where we come across the famous say form follows function from this modernist designer, as well Le Corbusier used it a lot, mainly because we start to have a very mass-produced fabrication of wood and steel, and therefore we use all the equipment of manufacturing and heavy industry of the Second World War to manufacture or mass manufacture goods for the reconstruction. Therefore, the equipment to bend the steel has become more sophisticated. The equipment to manufacture the plywood on the wood has become more sophisticated. We have more machinery, and we have as well some of the contemporary, like Ian's, the American and the European, they have become on the forefronts of the mid-century modern contemporary style. And to these days, we have very valuable and very timeless pieces of furniture of mid-century design. So if you need to have something beautiful and modern, contemporary and timeless, then always a beautiful piece of furniture of mid-century design. It's a must-have into your lounge, like the chairs of Eames, Charles Eames, this very famous American designer and architect. And I really encourage you to investigate and read more on the mid-century modern, because it's really important for us, as give us really, really so much to it. Now, on the opposite, we have a traditional style of design, of interior design. Now, that's what we will call it a more classic style, more traditional furniture, comes all from the European decor, kind of elegant through the 18th century, 19th century. We look there quite heavily into the furnishings. It's all about balance and symmetry. It's all about this traditional wooden furniture, these quite very comfortable armchairs and sofas with a really warm, dark chocolate texture. So it's all about making a statement without being the statement. And therefore, we have all these classical shapes in the doors, the frames of the frames and the architraves in the architecture, wooden floorboard in a very natural oaks tint, white wall with a very black or dark chocolate doors. That's what all define kind of traditional classic style, and almost I would say kind of understatement of people that is kind of well off. So you walk into these traditional houses, they, you know, yeah, sure, they're nice. They're not making a statement, they're not making a fuss, but you know, they all have that beautiful sculpture, or the ivory sculpture, or the bronze in the corner. And usually they love to have their Art Deco building into it. You can see into the Art Deco building. And building on the traditional style, we have the Hampton style. Now, this is from the Long Island in New York, which originally was a very kind of humble way to create the interior for the kind of a shack house or the boathouse in a very, very humble material, very simple. But it grew into a mix of American and English and Mediterranean styles, you know, sprinkled with coastal influence. For instance, the Greek, the blue used on the Greek, the white of the Greek architecture of the villages, and wooden floor, this open space, all this white, all these kind of aquamarine, you know, tonal light blue. And so we see a lots of Hampton style as well here in Australia, especially in the holiday houses. We see there a lot in the ocean coastal living. So Hampton style, it's kind of white wool, whitewashed wool, whitewashed furnitures, open plan kitchens with the living, sharing the same space, kind of down, you know, downside, but at the same time understated. and has become a kind of a mix of sophisticated way of living. Think about as well, for instance, the brand, they use lots of Hampton style country road. If you have to kind of referencing a brand, has used lots of Hampton's references into their own house collections. And now we look into luxurious of luxe glam style. This is really kind of rich, sophisticated. It is making a statement. It draws heavily from the Art Deco and mid-century style. It all goes into the reference of Hollywood, the richness, the gold, the metallic object, the shyness, the light fitting, very majestic, the chandeliers, the very prestigious bedrooms with the alcovas, rich furnitures and carpets, and we have as well very dark contrast of gold, black, and white into it. All to do with the exclusivity. Versace, for instance, is one brand that it really emphasized the importance of luxe glam and really rich textile for the furnitures and rich wallpaper. So richness is all about the importance, all about the game for very prestigious and luxe, glamorous interiors for living. Is all about the more is the better, the more is in vogue. So very rich way to define an ambient or a living. And lastly, for tonight, we are going to look at more of the industrial. Now, the industrial is the opposite of what we have seen the last glam. It's all about raw spaces, unfinished industrial architecture, warehouses, open plain, open space, lots of light, big shareable communal space, but with the addition of really interesting vintage and contemporary modern furniture, like some mid-century design furniture, with a very expensive and expensive as quality materials, such as leather or a leather sofa, or a beautiful wooden treated floorboard with a very simple storage system facility. But it's all about openness and space, the industrial look. So we don't really refine the building in itself. We actually emphasize the natural structural form of the building, and we bring alive through a well balance of really beautiful contemporary quality design furniture to balance the harmony between the role of the beauty of a space and the quality of the tactile sensation of the sitting, of the walking on the floorboard. And like, for instance, we in this industrial open space, that's where we have this beautiful industrial kitchen, is one block, stainless steel bench with this beautiful 6 iron cast gas top oven, all mixed together in a kind of good for last longing build quality to it. So industrial style is actually what is really considered more of a more of a trend setter. It was came out from New York, the conversion of the warehouse. We've seen that here as well in Australia. There is lots of conversion warehouse in Melbourne and Sydney. That's your industrial style. That's where it all comes from originally. And it all came during the, I believe, during the during the 80s, it became in the 80s. So there is a good 20, 30 years histories in the industrial look of the warehouse furniture. But again, it's all about opening space and light and good quality of living and shareable spaces. So with this one, with the last industrial cell, of course, there are many, many other, but these are the more major, the more you will see through all of the magazine and all what actually have given imprint in the last, I would say, 100 years of history. These are kind of the major still. And again, you will see the color scheme. And with this is conclude for tonight the session. So we have seen it, the 4 topics on the argument, how color kind of evolve in histories, that we have seen what kind of color methods we are using, the RGB, the SMYK, the Pantone matching system. Then we also have seen it, how and where the trends are to look into it, and what are actually the color scheme and the styles for the interior to be aware of it in our design educations. And with this one, I'm happy to take any questions. If everyone have have any questions or kind of more concept that you want to a bit more explanation than what we have seen it, I'm happy to answer whatever you might.
Thank you, Marco. I'm all good here.
Okay, terrific. Edie, all good? Samantha?
Oh, good, thanks.
Okay, terrific. So hope you kind of enjoy this evening lecture, this evening session. We'll post again the session on Canvas on the discussion forum. Have a look and review the PDF material that we'll upload it. Any question, again, post it on the forum. We're happy to give you further links or informations. And saying that, I'll see you next week. Hope you will have a good weekend. And just touch base, just a reminder that next week is kind of a assessment 1 due date. So if you have any questions, send an email. We'll look into it, because there is 1 week to go for your assessment 1 in color exploration.
Thank you so much for that, Marco. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend and see you next week. Thanks again for tonight.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.